reliably informed that we are quorate. There's a couple of people that we will be expecting. There's various things going on, so they hopefully will join us. So we're not expecting any fire alarms this evening. So if it does go off, we do need to evacuate, and we will. The best way out is through the front door and then down to gather by the cathedral. That's the legitimate place apparently that we need to go to if there's a fire. So I am the chair of this committee. My name's Christine Townsend. I'm the Southfield Ward Councillor, but I'm also the executive member for Children and Young People. And to my right is
Hannah Woodhouse, Director of Children's Services. Ellie Freeman, Councillor for Bedminster.
Hi, Sue Combs, Head of Service for Belonging and Education.
Jessica Taylor, Lead for Place Planning Strategy.
Heather Story, Director of Strategic Improvement and Collaboration in Children's and Education.
Ben Hegarty, Finance Business Partner, Children and Education.
Andrew Varney, Councillor for Brislington West.
John Glandris, Councillor for Stoke Bishop.
Katia Hanshin, Councillor for Brislington East.
Ian Hurd, Policy Committee Team.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. So we're expecting Councillor Bales and possibly Councillor Collar shortly. I've not been told of any substitutions. Have you been told of it? No. So hopefully Councillor Jeffries and Councillor and Yasin Mohammed will be along shortly. And that takes us on to agenda item number 3, which is declarations of interest. Has anybody got any councillors got any declarations that they feel that they need to declare related to anything on the agenda? Everyone shaking that? Go ahead.
I sit on the panel for Adoption West. I don't know if that's scrutiny, so I don't know if that's I have to declare that.
I don't know, but thank you for doing so anyway. And that takes us on to agenda item number 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 16th of October. Can I have a seconder to say that it was a correct record of?
Happy to have a seconder.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hornshin, seconding the minutes rather. Agenda item number 5. Sorry. Oh right, sorry. Are we happy? Yes, everyone's nodding. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 5 is the chair announcements, and I did write a few things down. So we had the budget yesterday, which was obviously quite big. There was an announcement about the SEND funding. Hannah, have you got anything to say about that? I'm not sure that I'm confident enough to say what it is that I don't think there was enough, from my perspective, there wasn't enough detail in what was released. Would you kind of agree with that? Yeah. Okay. However, what was encouraging is that it was spoken about, I suppose, at the Chancellor level, which is the first time I'm aware that it's been spoken of really outside of the Department of Education. So I thought it's kind of okay. We might be beginning to move on this a little bit. The other thing about the SEND is the Department of Education, since we met last time, has announced a second delay on their review, and so they're now saying that it's coming in the new year, whatever that means. So that, sorry? No, this is the SEND review. So we had a delay, and then since our previous meeting, it's been announced that there's been a further delay. So we may or may not have seen that review by the time we meet next. Yeah, okay. And just to fill you in on what's going on with we had school forum earlier in the week, and so we are meeting to discuss the local formula with the school forum, and then that will form part of the DSG that will then go up to full council to endorse or otherwise as part of the budget setting with that ring fencing. Thanks. Okay. And that takes us on to agenda item number 6, which is our public forum. So we had 7 questions and 2 statements. And Councillor Kent has indicated to us, and I can see him there, that he's the only person that was able to attend in person. However, the statements have been published and there have been names redacted for reasons that the public and councillors will realise if they've already looked or when they do look at those statements and questions. And the answers were published earlier on today.
Thank you, Christine.
Councillor
Just
Bond.
regarding the first statement and question from the young person,
Yep.
I'm just really hopeful that we can find some way to reach out to that person, because it does sound as though he's in a really difficult situation right now. And it'd be nice if we could reach out to him and try and find out a bit more, or him or her, I should say, to find out more about what's going on there.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to reassure Councillor
We've
Varney
already sent
what's
a message
happened?
to the young person to that effect, asking if they feel comfortable to send in some further information, which we can refer to the appropriate officers to investigate.
Yeah, so the idea being that would be picked up as a piece of casework. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the questions and the responses from officers have been published, as have all of those statements. So, looking to Councillor Kent. You've had your answers.
I have,
so,
thank you.
So you can have 2 follow-up questions.
Thanks. So my first follow-up question to my second question, so thank you for the detailed response. Sentence 2 of paragraph 2 of that answer cannot be a correct response there. It says data shows a falling birth rate, but in fact the data shows an increasing birth rate in Hengrove and Whitchurch Park and Stockwood planning area. So you don't need to believe me on that. Please do take a look at your own packs in front of you. Appendix 2, page 55. So on there you will see that, yes, there were 349 children born in the 2021 period in that area. But the data also points to around 380 children having been born in 2023, which of course would be an increase, not a decrease. So if there is an increased birth rate in the planning area, and if we are actually delivering 2,500 new homes over the next 10 years, which is roughly the plan for Hengrove and Whitchurch Park, give or take 100 homes, it's clear the data on page 55 can't be right. My estimate would be anywhere between 460 and 490 places being needed based on the council's own forecasting data, but those seem to be missing because it only has 426 in the forecast table presented to you. So around 60 children have gone missing. So where have those children gone in the forecast?
So the strategy is for 3 years, not 10. So over the course of the next 3 years, we are aware, or largely aware, largely from health, but also through nurseries and at preschool, how many children are likely to apply for a school place within the planning area that you're focusing on. However, over the next 3 years, what also happens, and this is something that's used for planning, is people move and people move in. So it's based on what's happened in the past, because forecasts are based on best guess data, I suppose, if you like, because it's not possible for us to say there will be X number of children and families definitely applying for a reception place in these particular schools for September 2027, because things happen between now and when the applications for September 2027 are needed. The data that's used, Councillor Kent, is what is known at the moment, that those houses that currently have planning permission and the formula that's used to work out how many likely reception places might be needed from those planning permission houses, plus what they call in and out, basically migration, families moving and families coming in. And that's based on what's happened in the past.
Okay, thank you for that response. The data I gave was a 3-year data period, not a 10-year data period. I actually used your page 55 data. So I am a bit confused here. The plan says is about ensuring that we have sufficiency of school places, yet the data makes it very clear that there will be insufficiency in certain parts of the city, in particular my part of the city, which will be left with no vacant school places at all by 2028, the plan period, because obviously the forecasting figures don't stack up when you look at the data sets that are used to come up with them. So I guess my question here is sort of implies that a bulge class could be brought in to deal with this issue. I'm unsure how a bulge class deals with the fact that year after year after year, there will be a demand for more school places in our area than we plan to meet.
Yeah, do you want, I mean, I know that you guys have met with Councillor Kent earlier on in the week, maybe some further clarifications of how this particular planning area interacts with the other planning areas and the other primary schools that these children living in these wards might also choose to go to?
Yeah, so when I talk shortly, I'll go through the formula in a bit more detail, which will probably be helpful as well. But Jess, did you want to comment on the figures for that precise ward?
Yeah, so as we've said, you know, this is a citywide PAM reduction exercise. It's a citywide endeavour, and we're focusing on current number and role to inform our current decisions. And, you know, the school admission code does stipulate that we do need to plan in advance for making amendments to school admission arrangements. So therefore, consultation now, taking place now, is for the admission year 2027. Our strategy is really clear that we're placing an emphasis on flexibility. So when we're asking our schools to reduce PAN, we are remaining that education estate, and therefore it can be used in the future if demand does increase. At the moment, we are predicting a decrease in birth rates and a decrease in the demand for the school places, and therefore that is what is informing this strategy. However, we do have the flexibility if that does change.
Shall I go on to my statement? Would that be helpful?
Well, can I mean, so this is for the next 3 years, but the numbers will be updated on an annual basis. And I would quite point out so the schools that are particularly, I think, that you're concerned with, the ones in your ward. So the Woodlands Academy has been undersubscribed for the last 3 years. For whatever reason, they've not filled their 30 places. So, I mean, it's an academy, but I also know from a governing body perspective and from a trust perspective that the chances are that academy trust are very interested in what's going on, and that school is probably getting to the point where financially, because the money comes in literally according to the number of children that are on their roll, they're not getting their full 30 children. I am concerned for Whitelands Academy going forward.
I'm sure you are. I mean,
yeah.
Neither of those schools, of course, are anywhere near my ward, but that's fine. I mean,
well, this is in my ward. Well, but okay, but it's a planning.
They're not near my ward.
These are planning areas.
Yeah. I mean, there are many other schools in the city as well that you could name that are half empty. That is not the issue. I'm here to talk about schooling provision within my ward. So I'm not here to talk about other parts of the city.
Okay, which of these primaries are in your ward then?
So, well, not the two you've just mentioned, and not West Town Lane.
So Woodlands is not, West Town Lane is not?
Yeah.
So Waycroft is?
No, Waycroft is not either.
Oh, okay, so all right, give me a clue.
So pretty much everything else you've got left there on your list. is.
Okay. They're the
So
ones.
try another school. We might hit a Hangover Whitchurch Park school.
Okay, so
if
is
you take a look,
is Perry Court
if you
one
take
of yours?
a look, all of the full schools are in my ward, bar Perry Court. Perry Court was the school because we rebuilt and expanded to meet the extra demand that's coming from the new housing. That is the only school with any empty places in my ward.
So it is in your ward?
Yes, Perry Court is very much in my ward.
Okay,
Right at the heart
so-
of the ward.
So can you see that this year there are 39 additional places, or there were 39?
I can see that.
Yeah.
No problem seeing that. And as I said, all those school places will be filled in 36 months' time because of the extra building that's occurring in my ward. That is why we rebuilt that school and expanded that school to meet that demand. Now, it is not the school's fault that the council has failed to deliver the housing on time. So if you think Hengrove Park is now anywhere between 3 and 5 years behind on delivery, the school opened for once on time. Unfortunately, the housing did not, that it's been built to meet. That is the only spare capacity in my ward. That is the reason why I am along here today, to argue that there's a problem with these numbers. There's no way that in 3 years' time we'll have less children attending local schools, given the massive amount of building that's about to occur. We will have 3 different sites building out, possibly 4 different sites building out next year. As it happens, they all tried to space themselves out, didn't they? And then they've totally failed, and they're all going to be delivering housing at exactly the same time. So that's why I was just along it. I mean, shall I just get into the brief statement, and then you guys can carry on? I appreciate the time you've given me as well. You've been very generous with time. So, I mean, just briefly then, just so, because this is an issue for the residents of Hengrove and Whitchurch Park Ward. Obviously, as you will be aware, wherever there's a large amount of delivery, the first thing residents raise is, but do we have the services to meet that need? And always, in public meetings, I've been able to say, with regards to school places, the answer is predominantly yes. We do, because actually we planned ahead. And we do have those school places at the moment, but we may not if we actually move to reduce the pan in our ward. And that is, I'm afraid I am being very parochial here. I'm here to talk about Hengrove and Whitchurch Park Ward and the need of my residents. As you'll know, there was a petition presented which had 500 signatures. Unfortunately, that is not referenced as I could see in the report, which is a shame, because there was only just over 100 people who replied to the public consultation, yet nearly 500 people from my ward signed, worried about the future of their schools and school places with the way that the consultation was worded. I am pleased to see there is now talk that we're not looking to close schools. That's great. That is wonderful news. I also accept that there is over-provision across the city. I'm not here to argue against that. As said, this is about Hengrove and Whitchurch Park Ward. So the overall plan says that it would be good planning and to allow parental preference to keep a 5 to 10% vacancy rate across the city. I agree. I think that is probably good planning. Unfortunately, the vacancy rate for my area will be under 5% based on the council's own demand figures, which I think I've already proven that those figures are incorrect. They are too low. I should point out that they have changed since the consultation. They originally projected to be 110 empty spaces in our planning area. That now in the paper that's come to you has dropped to 80 empty spaces. That was a data change just done in a couple of months. I think you will see that gap continue to fall as we go forward and those new houses are occupied, and also the demographic changes that are occurring in my ward continue. I represent the second oldest part of Bristol. Increasingly, those 1960s large houses are being filled by families, as I'm afraid older people move on. So I've already pointed out to you the figures on Appendix 2, page 55 and 56. And this is actually my concern. If my figures are wrong, are you absolutely sure that the rest of your planning figures are correct? Because I think that's something to think about as a committee. Because what we're being told is this is our best guesstimates, yet these figures have been broken down to 14 different planning areas and then being used as a judgment on whether or not we continue to maintain certain schools. And let us also remember, if some schools are asked to reduce their PAN, even if that doesn't mean closure, they're going to go perhaps from a 60 reception to a 30 reception, so from 2 form entry to 1 form entry. That will still have a massive economic effect on that school. They still have the same buildings to maintain, the same senior teachers to pay for. And so that is something for us to also think about, that effect on the rest of the city. Anyway, I'm going to wind up now. I think I've made my point that the figures clearly are not correct for our planning area, and in particular my ward. I am concerned about the provision. My ask of the committee is simply to not remove any school places at all from the Hengrove and Whitchurch Park ward, as I believe that within the next couple of years we will be beyond the capacity we already have. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, what I would add, Councillor Kent, to that is the local authority is not in a position to remove any places, because all of the schools that are listed in that planning area are either academies or voluntary aided, and so that they are their own admission authorities. We're not in a position to reduce those figures. So in order to manage the estate across the city, of which this is one element, we have to work with our academies, our local authority maintains, and also our diocese voluntary aided schools. It's not something that the local authority is in a position to do on its own. Part of the reason why this local authority's been in difficulty, both with primary school places and then secondary school places, all the while SEND places, is because of a lack of a strategy that looked at the entirety of the educational estate across the entirety of the city. In recent years, primary has been looked at, then secondary was looked at, and then SEND was looked at. What we're trying to do is to bring all of that together right up into the age of, including post-16 and beyond for SEND children, across the city, so that we are in a position to better manage the estate, to keep the small schools open. It is absolutely not the intention of this local authority to close any small schools. We want to work with the academies and we want to work with the diocese so that we can manage numbers and schools can remain financially viable whilst there is a need to reduce the places, because schools get funded for the number of children that are on their roll, and if they're getting 15 children instead of 30, they're getting half the funding, but they've still got to keep that school open. And if that's happening year on year, there will come a point where small schools, the governing bodies or the MATs or the diocese or whoever's running them, will have to consider whether it remains financially viable. And that the overarching strategy is to avoid that happening and work with our schools, work with our trusts and work with our diocese to manage this estate, so that when there is when the population demand goes up, we still have the capacity within that estate. It's easier to increase your PAN than it is to decrease your PAN. Okay, thanks for it. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Okay, so that takes us on to agenda item number 7, which is our regular CYP Policy Committee update. So I'll hand over to Hannah to introduce it to us. We've all got it in front of us. So do you want to just give us some headlines and then we'll take some questions? Thanks.
Yeah. Good evening. So just I'll try and not go on too long. Just the first thing to say is that we got an inspection call yesterday. So we are due to be inspected, which is a planned focused visit under the inspection looked after Children's Services inspection framework. It's particularly looking at children in need and child protection services, and inspectors will be on site next Wednesday and Thursday. So it's what we've been expecting, it's what we've been planning for. We really want to show inspectors the great work that we're doing, and the team upstairs are working away to prepare for that. So just to give you That's a very recent update. And then just, I was going to just mention in the budget, there were a number of things that were related to children, young people, obviously the two-child cap, the minimum wage, universal credit changes for young people. We've got news promised soon in there on skills and youth guarantee, funding for playgrounds, libraries and books. And very unclear, I think, where we are on SEND, as you said, Christine, and lots of speculation about what exactly that announcement did mean. And so I think it's probably best for us to wait and see what happens. But there, it's worth us noting, and parents particularly noting, that there's a lot of speculation going on about SEND funding into the long term at the moment as a result of that announcement yesterday, with both local authorities and schools wanting to understand the detail a bit more. So you can see that on the BBC News at the moment. Just in terms of our report, we've made some changes to the report as a result of your comments last time. So I hope that the data is a bit clearer in terms of when was the target that we're measuring against. Is it month, is it last year, and all of that. So I hope it's a bit clearer, but always happy to take any further comments on it. And as always, it's growing a little bit, this report, because it does include an update on the activity that is being carried out by the services, and we want to share as much as we can. We have got in the report on the 14th of November, Avon and Somerset Police announced that they charged 7 men as part of an ongoing child sexual exploitation investigation in Bristol. And you'll have seen that in the news. As I say, this is an ongoing investigation, so there may be further charges, and there will be a court hearing next year. So really, again, you know, tragic to see exploitation in Bristol, and the team, the social care team, continue to be working closely with the police to support victims of those offences. Other things in the report that we are updating on, we're noting that there'll be a child poverty strategy announced by the government. We don't know when. It's coming soon, we think, next week, I'm being told. And we also know that the Combined Authority are preparing their response to that, and the Mayor has suggested that we will be publishing a child poverty strategy across the Combined Authority by Christmas. So that's in response, we think, to the child poverty strategy being published nationally. So we'll be looking at that when that comes out. Also in the report, we've got an update just to say we have, as we know, launched the call for evidence on our external investigation into social media use by SEN and Disabled Children's Services. So just again to encourage anyone who has any evidence to share or any concerns about that, you can see clearly the terms of reference on our website. So please do get in touch with the investigator, completely separate from Bristol City Council. And the request was to try and do that by the end of the year, if possible. So please do encourage parents and carers to follow that up, and I know the PCF are doing that. I won't speak to the budget because there is a separate paper on it, and we've also got on our agenda an update on Young Futures hubs, and also adoption sufficiency, which is set out a bit in the paper. So on the data, firstly, you can see that the numbers of requests for EHCPs have gone down slightly, which is potentially the start of a bit of a trend in terms of reduction of requests. We have seen ongoing increase in terms of timeliness, but it's still very low. We know it's too low. And you can see there more detail about the amount of reports that our EP team are completing each month, which continues to rise, and the work that's going on into processing and supporting the assessment of EHCPs, which continues to be our top priority across the service. You can also see that there's good news in terms of the number of NEETs, which have decreased in September, but we know that needs to increase further, and we talked about that before. There's detail in this report about children missing education, electively home educated, and obviously we're at the beginning of the school year, so we have seen both of those rise, which is standard at the beginning of the school year, and I know that Sue and her team are working hard to get underneath and identify the support for those children. We've also continued to watch really closely attendance. We talked about this a lot around this table, but secondary schools, and I've been in 2 today, continue to really struggle to encourage all children to attend every day in terms of attendance, and that is a continuous priority for secondary schools in particular. Social care data generally stable, although we have seen slight rise in terms of the numbers of CP and children in care, and continue to focus there and through our Families First work. Some of the rise is attributable to asylum seeker children, but not all. And then on the education skills side, you can see we've put in a couple of graphs which show some really good news around the attainment 8 score going above the national average for the first time, which is good to see. It is 1 year, and we all know it's not enough, but also that free school meal children have performed better than the national average again for 1 year. So there's good news on the schools side too. There's information in the report about school improvement, where the team are working hard to support our most vulnerable primary schools, and also about PEXs. There's quite a lot around permanent exclusion data, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I know that there's a significant interest in the proportionality of permanent exclusion. So we've got some specific data in there on both numbers and ethnicities of permanent exclusions and suspensions, which I hope is helpful. We're doing a piece of work to review our service around alternative provision in particular. And then in the rest of the report, we've been looking at the harm outside the home strategy, which was announced, and we could always bring a bit more detail around the multi-agency child exploitation framework, which is now in place. It's in its 3rd month, led by the front door team, social workers, to support and identify children at risk of exploitation across the city. That's a new team. We've talked about that before. So there's a bit of detail in there, as well as about our youth justice service plan. And then I think the I have covered everything else in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions if needed. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jeffries, Vani.
Thank you. Yes, I had a couple of questions. One, you already touched on it, but the suspension rates is saying that the suspension rate for priority ethnic groups, that's Black Caribbean, White and Black Caribbean, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller of Irish heritage, that's increased by almost 10% from the data we've got. So I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that and what we're doing to address that and to support those groups.
That schools are keeping children on their roll, but they are being multiply suspended for a period of time. So we are seeing a rise in suspensions more broadly. I mean, one of the reasons in getting underneath the data in some specifically is to understand where particular groups are being hit. There is a correlation with children with EHCPs, child protection plans, and, as you say, particular priority ethnic groups, particularly Black and White Caribbean children in both exclusions and suspensions is a group which we are seeing, and obviously Gypsy, Roma, Traveller as well. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that we are doing. One is to highlight the data to schools so that they're aware that they are aware of disproportionality when they're making suspensions and exclusion decisions, not necessarily, but in terms of context, it's important that they understand that. But also we are engaging with community groups to understand, to share this data and to understand, share the understanding really of what we're seeing. We are also seeing significant numbers of white British children disproportionately also being affected as well. So it's those three groups that we are seeing again and again, whether it be attendance, achievement, or inclusion data. So I suppose I can't sort of say specifically what we're doing about those groups, and perhaps we can come back. I don't know, Sue, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Just in addition to that, we are gaining further understanding around that data. As Hannah's mentioned, the intersectionality of that data as well in relation to particularly children with EHCPs, and also gender within those groups as well, to give us further intelligence. Working with school partners across the sector, we've started a piece of work around racial equity in education as well, working with some of our maintained schools and academy trusts as well, and we'll happily bring a further update on the work around suspensions to a future meeting.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose it's obviously concerning in terms of some of these groups are already massively disadvantaged in other areas and face racism every day, and then school is meant to be a safe place for them. So you're saying we're doing a piece of work to gain more understanding, we're talking to community groups, but we don't have any more information about what that's producing right now, is that right?
I mean, I think the first step is to understand the data. So this is the latest recent data for this year. Last year we obviously, you know, we didn't see quite the same trends, but this is the latest data for this year. So then we need to look at how particularly can we engage with both those communities and also the proportionality that we are seeing in suspensions. The white and black Caribbean is 3% of the total population. What we're seeing is a doubling of that in terms of suspensions. So it's a small group, and we need to understand what's happening there.
Yeah, maybe if we get an update, that would, as soon as possible, that would be helpful. My other question was about the support that's being given to the children and young people in the hotels where the protests are being held. And I know we've got obviously an update on the sanctuary strategy later on, but I wondered whether you could give any more detail about what that support looks like for these children and young people who are already incredibly traumatised sometimes by their journey here and then by the racism they've witnessed.
Of course. I mean, I could. We have got Helen here who runs that service, so I don't know if it's possible, Helen, for you to jump to the microphone. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. Hi, I'm Helen Breyer, Head of Sanctuary Services here at Bristol City Council. So we do not house the asylum seekers, and we don't provide immediate support to the families. That's all done through the Home Office contractors. Sue might also want to say a bit about what we do with children in the education space. In terms of the protest specifically, we had voluntary sector partners and members of my team in the hotel on the day of the protest, this protest and the others, providing entertainment, games, distractions, and just showing solidarity of the city with those people in the hotels. Obviously, that was targeted at the children, but providing that wider sense for everyone in those spaces. And then longer term, we'll speak about the sanctuary strategy, but there's a lot within that, which is about reaching out to support those families and children in the hotels, which we can talk about more. But Sue might want to say more about the education space.
Yeah, from an education perspective, we've got 2 attendance and belonging officers who work with children and families who are situated in the hotels to support them in relation to understanding the education settings in Bristol and supporting them applying for places as well. So we've got that support mechanisms in place, and we're really working closely with those families. We're also looking at starting a pilot piece of work, working with our education settings on how best schools can support those children and families as well. So we're starting that piece of work in the next few months. The schools are being really supportive in relation to the recent protests. One of our schools actually put staff into the hotels as well because they knew the children, young people and families, and they were really welcomed in relation to supporting those children and families during that protest that took place.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear, and a massive thank you to the staff as well who went, because I'm sure that was quite a stressful day for them as well. So that's really appreciated.
Councillor Varney's next, but I'll put you on the list. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hannah, for the update. A couple of questions. The first one was also about suspensions. And in paragraph 29, one of the points is that recognising the increased vulnerability of pupils in year 5 and year 9. I'm just wondering what those increased vulnerabilities might be. I wonder if you could expand on that at all.
We do see numbers of, I think it's reflecting particularly in permanent exclusion numbers, where we see permanent exclusions particularly high in year 5 and year 9, preceding the year 6 SATs and then the year 10 key stage 4 period. So, I mean, it may also be a sort of developmental milestone as well. So I'm not suggesting that there's necessary, but it's a trend that we necessarily see. And obviously, if that does happen and a child's moving just before their tests or exams are about to be taken, then that's clearly damaging to their education. So I guess the question, particularly on the year 5 side, is what other alternative provision we can put in at primary levels, because we have seen numbers of primary exclusions going up in this city and nationally. Should we be providing more primary alternative provision, which we historically wouldn't have done? But that would be why, I think.
And to add to that, Councillor Galandris and I were on the virtual school children in care governing body, and from their perspective they are specifically looking at year 5 and year 9 children, because it does disproportionately impact those of our children that are most vulnerable. So that virtual school resource is, you know, that's been noted there, and there's resource going in to give additional support to the schools, but mainly the children in those year groups specifically as projects.
Thank you. That's interesting to sort of have a bit of analysis about that. That's great. Thank you. The other question I had was related to paragraph 5, where it talks about cost pressures due to slippage in children's home delivery. And I'm just wondering if you expand upon what the reasons are for the slippage and what we're doing to try and mitigate that impact.
So this does come out in the budget paper as well, which is right at the end of the agenda, but we can talk about it now. So we've reported before that we are building a number of new children's homes or repurposing a number of new children's homes, which is good, and that's what we want. You know, that's what we want to do. When we do any form of capital project, there's going to be slippage, and what we have seen is we've seen slippage, particularly in the procurement of the organisation that runs the homes for us. So some of them we run, some of them we run through a strategic partner. We saw a failed procurement exercise, which meant that we slipped back in terms of the people that run the homes, because they employ the registered managers. We need to make sure that we do that properly, because otherwise they wouldn't necessarily be registered through the Ofsted. We didn't manage to meet the timescale of that procurement, which slipped, which meant that any savings predicated on our introduction of children's homes local also slipped to a small degree, and we're recovering that. And now we've got I get a month by month, are we on track, what else can we do? But we did see some slippage last year in the procurement of those homes, and that's what that refers to.
Councillor Hornton?
Some of the questions were answered already, but I was lucky enough to attend a training as a governor for PEC's sitting, so that was quite interesting as well, and that was in these figures as well. One of the things that got me is that a huge amount of children on the at-risk register are in that group, or that are being suspended and permanently excluded. And also, it does say, I think 36% of children that are excluded or suspended have an EHCP. But I'm wanted to know how many of them who might have had SEND that we don't know about, that's undiagnosed, because a lot of, I can imagine teaching and working with children, that with some of them that wouldn't be diagnosed, they might have them, but there is no one else to chase after them. And actually what they've got is a SEND program, and that would help them, but there's no one to chase after it, if that makes sense.
So, I mean, I think it's, yes, as I said, it is the case that we're seeing a strong link between, a rise in special educational needs, particularly SEMH, social and emotional mental health conditions, and links into suspensions and exclusions in particular. And I mean, as I say, I've been in a couple of schools today, and what the schools are saying is that whilst they are supporting and holding children who either require a specialist place for whom we don't have one, or or waiting for EHCP assessments. I mean, we all know that there are delays there. They would be funded once the assessment is made, but they don't have the funding at the moment. So schools are holding a large number of, as we know, in that position, and are asking us for additional resources to be able to support those children. I mean, increasingly schools making, as you know, making provision through their SEND services, employing additional therapists, employing additional counsellors. So I think we are seeing, both from our own services, how can we speed up the assessment so that the funding will follow, but also in schools, how can they make more provision to be able to support children with those needs. So I think we are seeing it. I'll go back to the sort of need for national reforms more generally. And obviously there is a very clear bar for exclusion, which is appealable, and there's a clear process there. And it's good that we've seen exclusions going down. And sometimes that we do need to, you know, exclusions are necessary, but we do need to make sure that there's the right provision in place.
The other one was the worrying thing of how many children that have a, what do they call it now? The right words. Are children in child protection order on them, or children that are seen as having extra need from social services, and they seem to be being suspended as well. And obviously these children are suffering trauma in their personal lives, in their home lives, and now they're going to have the trauma of being suspended, because I know that it is a huge trauma on children if they get suspended or if they get excluded, especially, yeah.
So those two categories of children, currently the virtual school has a non-statutory duty to promote their kind of awareness really and their welfare within the schools. That will probably become a statutory requirement when the Children and Wellbeing Bill goes through. And it is part of why we've developed the governing body for the virtual school. We're talking about 8,000 or 9,000 children on an annual basis that will be known to social care in one or other of those two categories. So it's a huge group of children, and we need to work out with our schools and with our social care teams, how are we going to do that promotion of their welfare? It is the case that children that are known to social care but are not in care are more likely to have a negative experience of their education. So the attendance rates and the attainment rates are better for children in care once they've been in care for a year than those two particular groups. But it's at a national level that this is a problem, and that this has been shown as an issue. And the virtual school governing body is really where we're going to be. We will be seeing and kind of being able to track what work is going on there. We still have we have a vacancy for a Labour member on that governing body. Some of it will go to the corporate parenting. Yeah, good. I'm glad. It looks like Councillor Collins just volunteered herself to be that. This is for the virtual school governing body. So the education of those groups of children will be really scrutinised to a degree that it hasn't been, because a governing body was disbanded a couple of years ago, and then that will feed into the corporate parenting board. So having oversight of that and understanding what's going on both internally but also with sort of what's going on for their education it's in progress, I suppose, is what we would say.
Yeah, it always concerns me that particular group, because you work with them in school and you might not be able to identify them as a school teacher or someone that works in the school, and that they are so well represented in this particular PECs or in permanent exclusion as well as in suspensions is very worrying. And they should, in schools I can see them, they're the ones who are always going down to isolation rooms and things over and over again, and it doesn't feel like the schools are getting on top of the children. Those particular tactics of trying to get the behaviour we need in a classroom are not working with those children, and there seems to be this link that says, well, that's not working, so let's try something else, if that makes sense. Whereas some children, if you send them out of the classroom once, won't do it again for a long time. Do you see what I mean? there's a certain group of children, they tend to be that group of children, which worries me.
I mean, I tend to agree that certain groups of children are most unlikely to respond well to the kind of some of the current mainstream approaches to what would be considered to be behaviour, I suppose, as opposed to I'm communicating with you as a young person in a way that enables me to understand what's going on for myself. Although I do think the pendulum is beginning. I do think things are beginning to move, and the national context is moving. The offset inspection framework is just, they're sort of testing it out. I think at the moment, they're going in with the new frameworks to test it out with the schools, and there is more of a focus on inclusion and well-being rather than the end result that children get at, I don't know, end of year 6. What are your stats results, or what are your GCSE results? That may arguably in the past have provided mainstream schools with incentives to kind of adopt practices that would see those particular groups of children have negative experiences of their education. Councillor Collar?
So I've got 2 questions, because Shona prompted a question out of me with what she said earlier. Thanks, Shona. The first one was children that are missing education. I'm aware of children who are missing education because they don't get their first choices or second choices. That are applying for school. Do we kind of have an idea of how many children are missing school, especially for that first kind of term, if you like, that eventually, because I know parents, if they don't get their first choice, will be like, well, he ain't going, that kind of thing. So I don't know if there's like an idea of how many children are missing at least a portion of school because they're not getting their schools that they've chosen, and also children that are applying for specialist education that are waiting on a school that will actually take them.
Well, the data. Are you talking about children that presumably they leave primary and the parent then chooses not to enrol them into year 7?
Yeah, it's that transition between primary and secondary.
Yeah. So, point 13. 614 children at the end of September were known to not be on a school roll. 60% of that is as a result of just moving into Bristol, moving out of Bristol, or they haven't yet. They've moved in and they haven't applied for a school place. There's a small group within that are children in care, and that is something that the virtual school will be looking at. But there is also another group of children, you are correct, that have EHCPs that are also in a position where they're trying to find very specialist services and education provision for those children. But it's gone down because we've been looking at it, and the officers have dug down into what is it that's going on for this group of children, because it was over 700 this time last year. So there's always going to be a number of children that are missing education, just because that's the nature of moving, really, and applying and all the rest of it. Is there anything you want to add to that? Or I'm just looking at Sue might be.
Yeah, just to reassure you, when a child becomes CME, they're allocated a caseworker as well from our education welfare team. Those case officers work closely with our SEND officers as well. So we engage with the child, young person and the family to make sure we can place those children as soon as possible, but also identify any challenges and barriers they might have in relation to access and education. So we have improved a lot in relation to that casework, and we'll continue to do those work with those children and families in the future.
Okay, thank you. So my second question was with regards to what Shona said earlier about children that are in hotels, but we're talking about children, refugee children, children that have come in that are. I think I mentioned this the other day in corporate parenting about the ESOL and how we are making sure, because children that are going into education already have that issue around the traumas that they've gone through just to get here, and then all of a sudden they're faced with people who actually don't speak their language, and the level of additional support in schools for children with SEND and all the rest of it is not good enough. How are we ensuring that children with the additional language barrier are being kind of supported in school? Is there a particular provision for ESOL, or is that an expectation of the school to kind of manage it?
So I mean, it is for the school. I mean, we did have an ESOL team which was removed some time ago, and I think it is a big open conversation about whether we should be doing more. Obviously, it's skills funding, and so there's we have been talking a bit with the combined authority about whether there's a opportunity there. I don't know whether it's in the child poverty strategy or not, but whether there's an opportunity there to put a bit of support behind ESOL, because as you say, it's a growing demand, and it's fairly universal. But many schools will provide if they can, obviously, but I'm sure we can do more. I don't know if this is, so you know.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I mentioned earlier we're setting up a partnership working with some of our key schools that are taking in children from refugee and asylum seeking communities. You're right, EAL is an issue in relation to those children arriving in those settings. So we're looking at work through the partnership in relation to supporting schools with EAL assessments, but also trauma-informed approach as well, to make sure those children are settled in those education settings. So I can bring a future update to a future meeting in relation to how that partnership progresses.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Galandris.
I wasn't intending to speak, but Sue's fired me up on my hobby horse, which is the importance of being able to speak English. And I'm disappointed to hear that the ESOL team is no longer functioning, because speaking as somebody whose English isn't my first language, it's not the first language of my parents, but until we spoke English, we were knackered. That's the reality in Britain. If you don't speak English, you are absolutely disadvantaged, completely and totally. So the one thing you have to do with anybody who doesn't speak English is teach them English. They're not going to learn anything else. You're wasting your time. So English, teaching English to people is absolutely vital. It's one of my little hobby horses. If you don't do that, and there are provisions. I know people who volunteer to teach English. So, and I can see there's another report which says, that we recognise the importance, but it's under pressure. But it is a priority, absolute priority. And I'm surprised that we're not doing more in that area.
So I remember when we did have the ESOL service, probably I was still at City Academy, so we're talking probably 15, 20 years ago. As the sector has academised, the funds that the local authority would have been in a position to be able to kind of top the slice, I suppose, to provide those sorts of centralised services, no longer is part of what comes into the authority. And that is part of why it's become the response, not just that, many other things. It's like you are an academy and now you get the money, and it's up to the multi-academy trusts and the governing bodies and the trustees to sort of use the funds they get in order to meet the needs of the children that are coming into their school in whatever way that looks like. One area that as a local authority, we still do support, though, is ensuring that within the bits of the formula, the local formula, within the school block DSG, that we maximise what is called the additional educational needs elements. And one of those is ESOL. And that is in recognition of the additional kind of barrier that those particular groups of children have. So it's a small lever, but it's making sure that we're able to use all of the ones that are available to us as a local authority to invest in, to ensure that we can invest in that sort of education that's needed in those schools. Councillor Collar?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that in terms of using what we've got is great. But how do we ensure moving forward that there is a clear strategy to ensure that young children who come in as refugees and stuff are actually provided that kind of support with regards to that language barrier, which is, like John said, the severely disadvantaged in them. How do we as a committee kind of move forward and
we're not in a position to make schools do it because we largely don't run them. But Sue has said that there's a project that's kind of supporting schools. I would anticipate and I would expect that school improvement would look at ESOL within what's going on in whatever school that is. In the same way that they would look at how are your children in care doing, how are your SEND children doing. I would expect that to be a line that would be looked at by those school improvement officers. But a lot of what the local authority was responsible for has now, over time, has been moved out into the academy sector. And some of the academies are kind of better able to form partnerships with each other and across their map than others. And I think it's still a developing area of practice about exactly what is the sector going to look like and how is it going to work now that we have local authority schools, voluntary aided and academies and free schools. And that kind of it changes year on year as well. Because local authority schools become academies sort of on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Do you want to add something?
Well, I mean, only to say that I was in a trust this morning who serve a really diverse part of our city, one of the bigger trusts, and talking to them about exactly that is how can they both open their doors more to the community, which has been a request from the communities, but also what sort of provision can we put on across the area, I mean, across the whole city, because it's it's really important in terms of people not being isolated and particularly in the areas that need it most. So I think projects like the one that Sue's highlighting is where we can go. We can encourage, with better relationships with the trust, we can encourage that much more and bring them together in that way, I hope.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Freeman and Yasin, and then we're moving on because it's...
Yeah, hopefully mine is quick because obviously we spent a lot of time on this. There's so much in here and it's always really interesting to read and I really appreciate the work that goes into it. I just wanted to ask about the adoption data where you said that there is this 25% sufficiency gap. I know we've talked about it quite a lot in the past and obviously it's a high priority and there's a lot of work going into that. I just wondered what the kind of latest campaign or work that's going on to that and whether there's anything that we as councillors can do to support that work. It's vital that we close that gap over time.
Yeah, and then we've obviously got a paper on Adoption West on the agenda, which is more sort of a commissioning-y type paper. But I think one of the sort of next steps on from that is to make sure that we're doing everything we can through our sort of ownership and drive in Adoption West to deliver what we need. Again, it's a national trend. I chair the Adoption West board, and I think some of the challenges are around some of the national reforms, which are encouraging more families to be, children to be staying at home with families. Less a move away from adoption in terms of practice. Some of the challenges are around the demand for adopted families to particularly reflect the communities the children coming from. So we have got a gap across the area there in particular. And we've seen a peak in demand in Bristol for adopted parents, which obviously we haven't always been able to meet. So yeah, it's a significant challenge. I don't know if there's, Heather, there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, not really. Only to say, as Hannah's mentioned, it's where the kind of policy around bringing children home and keeping them in families, ideally in their own birth families, sort of coalesces with the commissioning piece that we're going to speak about a bit later. And there's kind of what we're doing to try and manage the demand side and what we're trying to do to manage the supply side. They're not meeting perfectly at the moment, and that is kind of a key area of our work. But they're being tackled partly because of the regional arrangement in slightly different places. So we've got some work to do to train them up.
Sorry, it does give me an opportunity to raise the fact that the adoption support grant is under threat, and we know that we'll talk more as a council about this, but obviously the support for adopted families, children in adopted families, is pretty material to whether more people are going to come forward. So that's also a factor.
And Yasin?
Yeah, just to make clarification about the ESOL and the school attending special refugees or newcomers to the city. As a school government experience, what we do is assessment at the initial stage. If the student needs like more support, the school doing like more support. And ESOL is like more like adults who can get that learning. But if the student, if we know it, whether it's maintained or like academic, they should have to ask like the school early stage like assessment, and they will get like support for that students. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 8, which is the school organisation strategy for 25 to 28, and it's got Vic on here, but I'm assuming, Sue, that you're here for Vic. Is that correct? Okay, over to yourself.
Thanks, Christine. So this evening we're seeking approval for the school organisation strategy 2025 to 2028, which sets out Bristol City Council's strategic approach to ensuring sufficiency, high quality and inclusive school places across all phases of education, from early years to post-16, including SEND sufficiency. This is the first time Bristol City Council has had a school organisation strategy that covers all phases of education. Since September 2016, birth rates and inward migration have reduced in Bristol, resulting in an over-sufficiency of primary school places. In 2025, 65 out of our 97 primary schools are undersubscribed, and projections indicate a potential surplus of 34 forms of entry by 2030 if no action was taken, and a form of entry meaning a class of 30 pupils. Over-sufficiency of places can be unviable for school budgets, as surplus capacity drives up fixed costs without corresponding to income, impacting financial sustainability and diverting resources from teaching and learning. The school organisation strategy sets out our strategic approach to pupil place planning from early years, mainstream primary, secondary, special schools and post-16 provision. In mainstream primary schools, we're aiming for a reduction of pupil admission numbers, PAN, 18.5 forms of entry or 555 places over the next 3 years, with the intention of supporting smaller schools to remain viable and protecting parental preference. For city-wide level primary pupil projections, we use the Office of National Statistics, Public Health birth data, adjustment for academic years and trends. Births are allocated by planning area, and reception to Year 6 projections use January 2025 census data. Citywide projections are split into the 14 planning areas using a formula that accounts for birth rates, reflecting our housing yield, migration, and takes into account historical retention patterns. The local authority are not proposing to close any schools, but instead suggesting a reduction in PAN in an area to balance the reduction in places across localities in our city. In Bristol, there are 104 primaries, Currently, 27 of those are maintained primaries with the local authority as the admission authority. This means there are limitations in our influence in admission decisions across the city, and the council is working positively and collaboratively with head teachers and trusts to ensure the sufficiency of school places. I'm now going to reflect briefly on the phases of education that are included in the strategy. Firstly, early years. The national rollout of 30-hour childcare entitlement from September 2025 will significantly increase demand for under 2 places. In 2024, Bristol had gaps in sufficiency for places for babies. The strategy commits to capital investment for expanding early years places, particularly in wards with lower sufficiency of places. The strategy also refers to preparing for future surplus in relation to secondaries. Bristol's secondary demand peaked in 2024-25, with some of Bristol's secondary schools taking bulge classes for several years to accommodate the demand. However, applications for Year 7 are now falling. The strategy maintains current capacity while preparing for future surplus through collaborative planning with academy trusts. The local authority will work in collaboration with schools and trusts to plan for adaptive PAN reductions as the impact of the reduced demand for places becomes apparent. Moving on to post-16, so Bristol continues to monitor young people who are at risk of being not in education, employment or training. A significant sufficiency gap has been identified in post-16 provision, particularly in relation to entry-level and level 1 courses. The strategy commits to targeting an increase in entry-level and level 1 provision in high-need areas. You will also note that the strategy includes SEND sufficiency. Between 2023 and 24, Bristol saw an 18% increase in EHCPs, significantly above the national average of 11%. The strategy commits to expanding local specialist provision, strengthening mainstream capacity, and co-producing solutions with families and partners. This will reduce reliance on out-of-school placements, improve outcomes through early intervention, and ensure smoother transitions into adulthood. Lastly, I'd like to reflect on a few key points in relation to our methodology. Each summer term, we engage with schools through locality meetings to review projected pupil numbers and consider any necessary adjustment to PAN. Our forecasts are based on housing development data. We use planning permissions for dwelling schedule between 2024 and 2029. Census-based pupil yield ratios. The 2021 census provides updated ratios indicating the average number of primary age pupils per dwelling type. The assumption is even distribution of housing development across the 5-year period. We calculate the total additional primary pupils expected and spread this across the 7 primary year groups. This approach gives us an annual estimate of reception-age children entering education in each locality, ensuring sufficient school places are planned. The School Organisation Strategy Consultation Survey was available on the Council's Consultation and Engagement Hub between the 30th of June and the 22nd of September 2025. The survey contained descriptions of the proposal as well as the context surrounding them. And you will see in the committee report the feedback that we had in relation to the consultation. So just to clarify, this evening we're seeking approval in relation to the school organisation strategy and really emphasising the need to ensure sufficiency, high quality and inclusive school places from early years post-16 and including SEND. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm looking out to my colleagues to see if there's some questions. So, Susan, Katya. Okay, go ahead, Susan, and then.
So the main one I've got is the reducing of class sizes rather than closing schools is the right being the right approach. Our my concern is that how are we going to ensure that the council can actually deliver when a lot of schools are academies, and we can't guarantee that the academies will do what we want. There are academies that don't actually engage with the council full stop, and don't provide us with evidence about lots of different things. So, I mean, the strategy, the whole report is brilliant. It's well put together. It's really informative. But how do we as a local authority ensure that academies are following through with what we would like them to do in terms of they're funded per pupil, so they kind of have a vested interest in maintaining the number of schools and pupils, and how they can react to a drop in numbers, and how can we ensure that they will actually follow this strategy, really.
Okay, so it doesn't matter what type of school it is. So if a school is saying we've got 60 places for reception and they get 31 applicants, they have to offer all of 31 a place. But the infant class size says you can't have more than 30 children in a class. That's the law. So that would mean that 31 children, they would have to in some way separate that into 2 classes in some way, and therefore you need 2 teachers. Multi-academy trusts and local authority and voluntary aided schools, the finances, as we know, are very stretched. So a multi-academy trust is looking at numbers as much as local authority schools are. And it isn't in the interests of any of those multi-academy trusts to just watch numbers fall, because, particularly if they're 30 entrants, there aren't the economies of scale that you get if there are 60 coming in, or if there are 90 coming in. So the strategy here, or what we're looking to do, is to reduce those primary schools that have got the larger numbers, so that if they go from 120, for example, to 90, any applicants over 90, because it would be oversubscribed, like many were only a couple of years ago, those that are oversubscribed would then they'd be likely to get their second preference. And the idea is that the children that are applying for reception classes are better spread across all of the schools, whilst maintaining the capacity of what was a really big primary. If it's got 4 reception entry classes, the capacity within that physical building, it can be repurposed, or if there is an uptick in birth rates, it can then be increased back up to £4. However, if a 1-form entry school like St Pius, or a half-school entry like St George or St Barnabas, it's not in a position to reduce its PAN any further than 30. And that's when, over time, it will become financially unviable. Hot Wells is in that, so the recent one is Hot Wells. The trust look to merge that school with the CPS, because presumably the children that live in Hot Wells are now at secondary school, and the people that are now living in, the bulge in primary has gone through. You are correct in that we will reduce our own, where we are our own admission authorities. But it's about, Sue, you'll be able to show what's happened so far and how the relationships have been built. But the point is the system belongs to all of us and none of us, and it is in everyone's interests for it to be managed. And this is about the local authority trying to lead on that management across the whole of the city, because ex-MAT is interested in their schools and the other MAT is interested in another school. Only the authority has the whole city kind of view. Do you want to talk about how it's been done over the last couple of years?
Yeah, just to reassure you, we've already run locality meetings in relation to sufficiency across the city, and attending those locality meetings, all multi-academy trusts have engaged really positively in relation to looking at sufficiency across the city in relation to the different planning areas, and are very much working positively with us on that.
Obviously, I'm in South Bristol, and my concerns are, for example, where is it? Merchants Academy. Percentage of children with an EHCP plan in January 2024, information not available. Percentage of children with SEN of support in with SEN support in January 2024, the information wasn't available. And that is the sort of thing that is for me is concerning. That indicates that at least this academy is not working with the local authority, and if numbers drop, financially, is it viable for them to remain open? In terms of numbers dropping, and the concern I have is some academies work brilliantly with the local authority, but my main concern is academies that are not.
I mean, is it worth saying? So, I mean, I suppose I always feel a bit conflicted because obviously I have played in a previous role with the academy sector. But I think in this case, as Sue said, what we've seen in this city is that we are one of the most academised cities. What we have seen is academy trusts who've been coming forward to voluntarily reduce their class sizes for the reason that Christine has said, is because if you've got a half-empty school, it hits children most, because you have to staff the classroom and then you don't have enough funding to run the provision properly. And it is the case that we've got some really terrible Key Stage 2 results in this city. We've got some great ones as well, but overall on average it's not good. And there's a link between poor Key Stage 2 results and half-empty schools. And so the better we can manage our school estate, we will see results going up, which is why it's really important to be able to do this strategically, as we say. But in this case, we have seen all of the reductions, very nearly all of the reductions that have come forward voluntarily from multi-academy trusts. So they're I don't want to use this language, they're helping us out. It's their problem too. But I think we have seen a positive response. It is the case, let me follow up on merchants, because I mean, it is the case that all the information should be publicly available, and if it's not, we should definitely be talking to them. And we talked to another secondary school recently who wasn't sharing their data, and we have picked that up. So it should be available publicly, and if it's not, we're happy to do that. I do think in that case that academy has been working in recent times much more closely with us. So it'd be really good to follow that up if that's not happening.
It's probably because of the change in ownership, but we can but hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'd add to that is these governance structures and the powers that the local authority have or don't have in relation to academies are set in law. We can't change what that is. We are not in a position to say to multi-academy trust, you need to reduce. I'd love to be in a position to be able to do that. And that would be a great power to come back to the local authority. It doesn't look like that's happening. And so it's partnership working between the authority and multi-academy trusts, but also between the trusts themselves. And the authority has kind of began to lead on that, because there was, and arguably still is, but I think it's kind of beginning to dissipate a bit, this kind of competitive element between academies, between trusts. And with a shift from central government around looking at well-being and inclusion, as opposed to what we were talking about with year 6 SATs results and GC, you know, hard sort of exam results, that will only help. But bottom line is, we are not the admission authorities for academies or voluntary aided schools. We've never been the admission authority for voluntary aided schools. We've never been able to say to diocese schools that are voluntary aided, you need to up your PAN or reduce your PAN. And there are now more schools that we're in that position with. But ultimately, academy trusts are not able to, they might be able to prop it up for a bit if there's a falling roll, but what they're doing is using funds that come in for another school in order to do that. So it isn't in their interests to have lots and lots of empty classrooms that haven't got children in there, and to have a staffing structure that reflects that. The reason that it's done 18 months in advance is so that schools are in a position to be able to plan for their staffing, and have a better understanding about what it's going to look like sort of further in the future.
The schools, Children Wellbeing and Schools Bill is referenced in the strategy, is looking at our strengthening the ability of local authorities to do exactly that. I don't know where it is at the moment, but it's still going through the House. My understanding,
not in relation to the admissions, in relation to the directions, is my understanding. So at the moment, the local authority can direct a local authority school to take a child in care. We can't do that with an academy. We have to go to the Secretary of State, because academies are answerable to the Secretary of State, not local authorities. But they're looking to sort of make some changes in that. So we hope that that's the case. Susan,
I just want to say thank you for the very nice answers.
All right.
My question is rather left of field, I know, but I really did like reading this. It was a very informative piece, and it does look like they're trying to do some work to put it together and get it together. My question was more around, we have 52% of children walk to school. That's right, 52% of children walk to school in primary school, and the rest get taken by car. And as I know, many counsellors have massive inboxes of how bad driving is around primary schools, around pick-up and drop-off time, and also around livable neighbourhoods. One of the major complaints about is I can't get my child to school on time, because they're driving it, not walking it. So I was wondering if the distance from schools is included into this. This is not... If you've spoken to the transport department, or whether you've tried to work out how to get kids, young children, into a more local school where they can actually work, where it becomes a reality that they could walk to school, whether that's been taken into account. Because if we want to make a city that has less cars, which we all want, we have to be practical about it. And I think we all have a little bit of role to play in it, even if that's not in this particular paper.
Christine might add to this, because we've had recent conversations in relation to it. So when schools are looking at running their individual consultations in relation to PAN reduction, they actually take that into consideration, and it's included on an individual school level in relation to their consultation. But it hasn't informed the wider City Council strategy.
Councillor Varney?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, officers. This is obviously a huge piece of work that you've undertaken, and you are to be congratulated on that. And also, I was delighted to hear that the intention is not to close any schools. I know is a worry that some people had, and alluding to what Councillor Hornson's just said, you know, a school is part of the community. It's really important to our local communities, in the same way that libraries are really important to our local communities, shops are really important to our local communities. They need to be embedded in their communities. And, you know, we want people to be able to walk to school. You know, the idea that children have to travel long distances to go to school is not sustainable from an environmental point of view, from an economical point of view, from a time point of view. So it's great that we have lots of schools in our communities across the city. But I am concerned by some of the issues that Councillor Kent raised. And, you know, he's got a forensic mind. He's a bit of a statistician. I can hardly say the word. A bit of a geek, I was going to say, but I think statistician is a better word. But I think that he's demonstrated that there are some issues with the numbers regarding his ward of Hengrove and Whitchurch Park. I'm not a statistician, and I am concerned about the accuracy of figures in my ward and in other wards around the city. So I'm wondering whether it might be a good idea to defer a decision on this report, just so that officers, I'm not trying to be offensive in any way whatsoever, but just so officers can really double check the figures that they've got, and perhaps also work again with Councillor Kent so that he is happy with what's been proposed for his ward, and maybe also have conversations with councillors around the city so that they're aware of what's going on or what's being proposed for their wards. And, you know, councillors know their wards almost better than anyone else, so it would be good if they could be included in the conversations. Thank you.
Nothing is being proposed for any school in this strategy. I take the point about the numbers, but there are no proposals in this because the schools need to come forward with their own proposals, which they did last year and they are continuing to do this year, and they will need to next year and the following year, which is what this is about. And there's a focus on primary school here, primary school figures, I think, because of Councillor Kent's interest and intervention in it. But there are early years and SEND and post-16, which we're really concerned about, because the secondary school numbers are going to be in post-16 quite shortly, and there's a post-16 piece of work where we will need to expand, and we need to start thinking about that. Otherwise, we'll be back in the position that we were with secondary schools a few years ago, and before that, the primary schools, because people don't realise that children grow up and get a bit older and all that sort of stuff. So there aren't any proposals in this. We can only propose as an authority to reduce the schools for which we are the admission authorities, and that is 2027. And it reduces every year because more and more primary schools become academies. So there aren't any proposals, I suppose, is what I'd say to that. But I don't know whether officers will kind of want to say anything to that.
Also, just to reassure you that when we've been having conversations with schools and MATs, we are looking at schools that have a historical surplus of half to one form of entry. We're not recommending any PAN reductions in schools that are oversubscribed or schools that have had an anomaly year. So, you know, all conversations with our schools and MATs are really informed by historical data. The strategy makes recommendations based on the data in it of the number of forms of entry that would be viable to be reduced. But that doesn't mean that that is the number of forms of entry that need to be reduced. And in reality, so far, you know, a lot of the planning areas we've secured, say, half the number of forms that we've recommended. So this is really flexible. We don't foresee any issues in terms of this PAN reduction in 2027, the admission year. And as we've explained, increasing PAN is much easier than decreasing PAN, and this is a very flexible exercise.
I mean, I think just to sort of reiterate, what we're trying to do is provide some strategic leadership, a bit of a framework. The data is the latest that we've got, and it's changing all the time, as you've said. We plan on planning areas, not ward areas. People move. It's based on health data, so it is the latest, best data that we have, and it doesn't reflect ward positions. As I say, it reflects a broader area. And we have met with Councillor Kent to talk through, you know, the sort of perception of a difference in the figures. I don't think we do necessarily recognise that they're wrong. The question is that the area in which we're looking at is a different area. I suppose I would argue that what we need to do is to have a framework in which we look at the latest data and we bring partners together and we're influencing decision making. We can't force anyone to reduce we can force our own schools, but we don't have very many. We're influencing Academy Trust to make decisions on the basis of the latest, best data, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's quite urgent that we do that because, as I said, it does affect standards as well as finances. But we will continue to look, obviously, with all councillors at the data, so that we can reflect what you're seeing, and as housing developments go up, that will change. Of course, as you say, we update that every year. So I think with those assurances, if there's anything further we can say about the assurances of the data within the document, then we will do that. It's a framework within which we're trying to operate, which has been missing for some time, if that's helpful.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move to the, so this is a decision we need to take, so we need to vote on this. So I need to read out the statements for, because of the officiality or whatever. Right, okay, so that the Committee for Children and Young People, 1, approves the school organisation strategy 2025 to 28 as provided in Appendix A1. Number 2, endorses the proposed reduction of primary surplus capacity through targeted PAN reductions. Number 3, supports continued capital investment in early years provision to meet expanded entitlements. Number 4, notes the strategic planning requirement to manage future secondary surplus places and manage sufficiency. 5, approves the expansion of local SEND provision to meet rising demand and reduce reliance on out-of-area placements. Number 6, agrees to monitor the post-16 sufficiency and support targeted provision for vulnerable learners. And number 7, notes consultation report at Appendix F. Do I have a seconder for those recommendations, please? Thank you. You've got noted counselling, I think. Yeah, okay. So, can I first take votes for those recommendations, please? Okay. And those against the recommendations? And abstentions? Okay, 5 abstentions. Thank you. So that passes. Okay, agenda item number 9 is the Bristol Sanctuary Strategy and Action Plan 25 to 30. And Helen Breyer is... Okay, and Toby are going to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Toby. I work in the Policy, Strategy and Public Affairs team. And for the last year or so, I've been supporting the Sanctuary Service to develop the Bristol Sanctuary Strategy and Action Plan for 2025 to 2030, which we're here today to ask for approval for. So very briefly, the rationale for a new strategy and action plan was quite clear. So the existing refugee and asylum seeker inclusion strategy expired in 2024, and the picture has changed quite significantly since it was written. So back then there were no hotels, or very few, in the asylum system, and it was also very different. So we've since had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, political issues in Afghanistan and Hong Kong, and as a result, the demand on services the council provides is now very different. So we needed a new strategy and action plan to reflect this. So the strategy and action plan has been comprehensively developed, led by evidence. So late last year, alongside North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, we produced a strategic needs assessment of asylum seekers and refugees, which gave us a very detailed picture of the needs of sanctuary seekers in the city. And this was supplemented by a review of national policy legislation and best practice from elsewhere. In spring of this year, we engaged with key stakeholders, so that was groups that support sanctuary seekers, asylum seekers residing in hotels and dispersed accommodation, refugees, Ukrainian guests, and others. And this engagement helped form the 3 priorities within the strategy. So to meet basic needs such as safeguarding and urgent health needs, to promote opportunity through things like English classes, employment skills and training support, and to build compassionate and resilient communities. From the engagement, in August, a draft was brought to this committee,
Before the following month, we've conducted a 6-week public consultation on the draft strategy and action plan, which received 330 responses, and each of the 3 priority areas received around 2/3 support, which meant agree or strongly agree answer. All the 11 focus areas in the action plan as well received majority support, with education and English language classes being the most supported with 70%. Changes were made to the strategy and action plan following the consultation. This included further thought to the needs of specific cohorts such as disabled and LGBTQI+ sanctuary seekers, supporting the role of welcome centres, and also a focus on tackling misinformation and disinformation. So to summarise, the strategy and action plan here for approval has been data and engagement led. It sets out how the council will support sanctuary seekers in a way that meets people's basic needs and successfully supports people to settle and integrate with local communities. It's clear in its commitment to Bristol as a city of sanctuary, to meet our local duties as set by government and to provide support so that sanctuary seekers can integrate and build new lives. And I'll pass to Helen, who will talk through the action plan and the funding.
Thank you, Toby. So the strategy sets the framework and the action plan will turn that into the concrete steps that we need to take to deliver on that ambition. So it'll deliver on the 3 pillars of the strategy that Toby mentioned: meeting basic needs, including health, homelessness prevention, safeguarding, promoting opportunity, that's where the English language, ESOL, comes in, and employment, compassionate and resilient communities. So that's about introducing our sanctuary seekers to the UK and creating spaces for sanctuary seekers and existing communities to meet and build connections. I also just wanted to highlight 2 key principles that underpin the action plan. So it is designed to promote independence and integration at every stage of the support. You see that in those kinds of activities, and ESOL and employment being at the heart of some of that. Also to have a strong focus on inclusion and intersectionality, as Toby mentioned, particularly for sanctuary-seeking women and children, disabled people and LGBTQI+ people. The action plan will be delivered in-house by Bristol City Council teams and through direct awards and grants with our partners in the voluntary and community sector. And we will be developing a robust and appropriate monitoring, reporting and learning process that is underway. Just 2 words on the funding for the action plan. So you will see that the action plan covers from 2025 to 2030, same as the strategy, but funding is currently only allocated to March 2027, in line with our current central government funding. So this will be regularly reviewed and updated based on national policy as that evolves and funding availability, as well as our own learning about the kind of specific interventions that are working. The funding for the action plan comes from central government schemes, including the Asylum Fund from the Home Office and various refugee resettlement schemes, as well as Homes for Ukraine scheme. And as I say, the action plan will adapt as needed, depending on evolving policy, funding and funding instructions, as well as emerging need and opportunity in Bristol.
Thank you very much. So this is the final strategy and action plan. We did previously see the draft before it went out to public consultation. So has anyone got any comments or questions? Councillor Varney, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, just a quick comment, really. Just looking at the feedback from the public consultation, I was really delighted and, in fact, relieved that it was basically 2/3 positive throughout. That hasn't been the case in other parts of the country, so I'm really pleased that that public consultation went so well. And also thank you to Toby for sending out the explainer before the meeting. A lot of people get confused by the terminology. They don't know the difference between refugees and asylum seekers, and I think that's really important to know and helps to combat some of the misinformation, disinformation that's out there. So thank you very much for the report. I will be supporting it, of course.
Councillor Galandris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, a very polished report, and I'm very happy to support and will be voting in favour. And I'm really pleased that on page 224 you've got my hobby horse about language learning. Language is the primary barrier to integration. Access to English classes should be a top priority. Really, really is. I can tell you, speaking personally, it really is. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Collar.
I just want to say I really enjoyed having a little look through it. I might not have read word for word, but I got enough of a gist. I'm agreeing with John. the ESOL thing, because that's obviously been a bit of a thing for me. I'm really excited to see what's coming forward from this report, and I'm totally on that page. So.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions, then I will go into the formal bit of what I need to read out as the chair. So we are being asked as a committee for children and young people to 1, approve the Sanctuary Strategy 2025 to 2030 and the Sanctuary Action Plan, and number 2, note the responses on the draft strategy, Sanctuary Strategy and Action Plan contained within the consultation and engagement report. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Varney, thank you very much. Okay, so firstly, can I ask all those voting in favour to raise their hands, please? That's unanimous, yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, move on to agenda item number 10, which is the refreshed Sufficiency Strategy for Children in Care and Care Leavers, 2025 to 28. Gail is listed, but I'm assuming it's yourself, Heather, that's going to talk to this paper. Thank you. When you're ready.
Thank you. So our updated sufficiency strategy, this is a statutory document that we have to publish and keep up to date. So this strategy helps us to meet that duty. It's an update to the previous one to signal our priorities really to the market, to help them to make strategic decisions around their provision for looked after children and care leavers. What I would say is that the kind of vision that sits behind the strategy is unchanged. It's detail that's changed. We have updated it particularly to include our work around Families First that you heard about recently from the transformation team. So it sets out our ambitions to keep children local, increase placement stability by developing the market and creating more specialist provision. And it also reflects the work to develop our in-house provisions as well. So 4 key developments: the new corporate strategy with focus on supporting children, families and adults' health and well-being, and the aim of stability wherever they live and independence for children in our care. The Families First programme, as I mentioned, the South West Children's Alliance intentions, that's the 14 local authorities in the South West collaborating with the market to create sufficiency where needed and try and establish fair cost of care, and our plans to use capital to grow our own children's homes. So there's a lot of detail in the strategy itself, which I won't go into in at too much length now, but I'm more than happy to take questions, particularly on the updated areas.
Okay, any committee members, comments or questions? Katya, go ahead.
I was really interested in this strategy, and I think it's a good one, and I've been reading it in detail. There was just 2 little comments I had. One of them you're probably going to not thank me for. It was just that you had a challenge on your workforce for residential market to increase recruitment and retention of registered managers. And you know what I'm going to ask. Do you pay them well, and how are they being paid? Because what I actually wanted to ask was, are they Bristol City Council employees, or are they employees of another organisation?
So where we have a strategic partner running the home for us, and they are employed by that strategic partner.
Because there's quite a shocking history for mainly charities, unfortunately, that are paying such bad salaries, and how will this affect with the living wage or the minimum wage increase? But that means that people that were more qualified are on a very low wage, and they're now bumping onto living minimum wage. So that would cause problems with retention very clearly. And this isn't an easy job to do. It's a very well-meaning job, and it probably is quite rewarding, but I can imagine that it is a very stressful job or taxing job to do. That was one of my questions. Do we know the pay scales, or do we know that they're being paid decent wages?
Yeah, so I don't have the detail, but I can circulate it. My understanding is that the managers in our internal homes are paid what I would say is a decent wage. I don't think it's as good as
sort of school teacher, social worker type wage.
Yeah, and we're also looking at what the kind of career progression routes can be. There's quite a well-established career progression from home managers into social work, practice as well. So we're kind of looking at it in the whole of that. The other thing that I think, the area that we don't have a lot of control is in our external children's homes, whether they're in the local authority area or not. But we are thinking about our work in quality assuring those, and how we look at the pay scales of the managers particularly will need to be part of that. Because it's critical to the sustainability of the homes and the outcomes of the children and people.
Absolutely, because you have to have a stable income that you can have a life on
Yeah.
to create, and how important these people are in literally saving other people's lives, giving them a career path and changing their life course. These young people they work with, if you see what I mean. It's really, really important. The second one was more of an information one where I could get maybe more information. I was interested in the prevent children entering care by using better data to spot trends and ideas of those at risks. And I was quite interested in what data you'd be collecting and more. You don't have to tell me now, but somewhere I could find more information on how that's done, because I'd be quite interested in that.
Yeah, of course, more than happy to share that. So some of that is in the Families First work, and looking at those children who are potentially on the cusp of care, and how we identify those. But I could share more information about that.
We were talking earlier about the children that are being suspended and things like that. And I know from school that you get some children that are constantly being sent out of the classroom and that sort of thing. So, and how that interacts with their families and that sort of thing, that can be quite complex. So,
yeah, I'm more than happy to share the kind of the risk factors that we're looking at.
Sorry, Shona, and then Susan.
Thank you. Yes, I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about the Family Finding Fund and the network building practice and what that looks like and how that's going in terms of connecting children and young people to extended family or family friends, people who are really important, and providing them that extra support.
So a lot of the family finding work is going on, as I said, through the Families First programme that you heard about recently. I don't have the details of the money to hand, I'm afraid, so I'd have to send you that later in terms of the fund. But the work is progressing well. Workers are really positive about it, and really positive about the outcomes for children and young people. We're pretty much on target to deliver what we plan to this year for those children and families. I think there's more we can do there. But yeah, I'm sorry I don't have the money on the fund bit to hand, so I'd have to send that to you separately.
Thank you. And then my only other question was about the mother and baby units, or 16 plus mothers, and maybe we'll come on to this further in agenda item 12, but I wonder if we could talk a bit more about what our goals are, if you know how many units are being planned for 16 plus mothers, because you're incredibly vulnerable if you're a 16, 17-year-old mother, and you are still a child yourself, but you're having to care for your child. These are incredibly vulnerable young women, and this is so important and such a key life-changing event for them, and a real opportunity to get in and give them the skills that maybe they haven't been taught by their own families. So can you talk a bit more about what the plans are around that?
So these are commissioned units. They're not ones that we're planning to kind of open and run ourselves. We have frameworks that we can draw on in the region, which is really helpful, particularly because it helps us to quality assure them and make sure that they can meet our needs precisely. It's a market that's quite specialist, as you may know. Different young mothers have different needs, and often you will want specialist provision around substance misuse or around mental health or around kind of trauma-informed practice. I mean, we would expect all of our practice actually to be trauma-informed, but kind of with specific lenses to the experiences of those young mothers. And that's why having a framework approach from a commissioning perspective and sufficiency is really helpful, because it means that you can commission directly to the need of those mothers. So that's what we'll be looking to develop in the region.
So do we have rough estimates of how many of those units we need?
Well, it's pretty variable. I mean, I think we've got 4 at the moment, 4 placements in that area that we're using currently. Because it's quite small numbers, there's quite a lot of variation. So we will have to monitor that regularly. I'd be surprised if we needed more than 10 at any point.
Yeah, it's just the social workers are preparing for Ofsted. That's what we were. If there's any more information that you would want about it.
Yeah, no urgency. I don't want to add to their stress when I'm sure they're already working overtime. No, it's just it's not an urgent question. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Collar?
Yeah, I'm looking at this just because I might have an interest in it for some particular reason. The 16 plus commissioning strategy with regards to us being a sanctuary and that we have 70, I think it's 70, that are children over the age of 16 without the leave to remain. How are they being fast-tracked at the age of 16 so that they are given the leave to remain because they are children in care? So we've got a child who's in care because they are asylum-seeking children, and they have to get a leave to remain. How are we, not us personally, are we ensuring that these children are given that right to remain in a way that they can actually access support while they are still children? Because if they're 16 already, and we have to wait for all this leave to remain thing, to ensure that they're getting absolutely the right level of support in that interim, so that when they are moving into independent lives, if you like, because again, we're coming down to the language barrier and all that sort of stuff, that impact when you've got young people coming in at a reasonably young age, and needing that kind of immediate support, if you like. I don't want them to be missing out. You know
Yeah. So we are in a position, and I think the paper a bit later explains this, we are in a position where there are a number of children that were unaccompanied as asylum seekers, and therefore they come into care. That's what happens to children that are in that position. When they become 18, they are then care leavers, and the responsibilities for the care leavers from the local authorities' perspective is exactly the same, regardless of what their immigration or otherwise status might be. It's the Home Office that is processing those applications, and we are not in a position to be able to speed that system up, or I don't know. I mean, somebody else might know that the Home Office is specifically looking at unaccompanied young people across the country to try to speed that up. I don't know. But the responsibilities from our perspective is this is a child in care and then a care leaver, and the responsibilities are exactly the same. From a financial perspective, it is better when those children when their status has been decided by the Home Office. I'm looking also at see if there's anything that officers want to add. This is a very specialist area of law, and yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. They're protected by their status as a looked after child and then as a care leaver, and that is because of that they're no different to any other child in care or care leaver, and therefore they access all of the support that they might need as a child in care and a care leaver, which is regardless of the status that the Home Office has granted them. I mean, I think there is a national call clearly to the Home Office to speed up the processing of applications, but in terms of kind of powers to affect that, we don't have any.
Wouldn't it be nice? There's also, some popped in my head, children who present and say they are of an age have to prove that they are of an age, and they have to have that, whatever it is that they do to prove that they are a child as opposed to an adult. I'm just curious as to the amount of time these children, if they are children, and I know quite a high percentage are being turned down and refused to be seen as a child and stuff like that. So there's this whole thing going on. If you've got somebody who's 15, 16 coming into this country, they have to prove initially that they're 15 and where they come from, and in all that time, it's like, are we just making sure that they are safe, that they are protected, that they, you know what I mean? Because we don't even, you know, until they are proven to be a child, that they are allowed to stay. It's that kind of interim, kind of like you know what I mean, that they've been brought into this country for whatever reason. They're allowed to stay for whatever reason, but in the meantime, they've got to prove this, prove that, prove that. And it's like, by the time we've done all this, you know, where are we now, kind of thing, like, you know. And I'm not talking in terms of local authority. I mean, overall general picture of, you know, taking in refugees from wherever and having to go through that whole process. I mean, that is traumatic.
Yes, you are absolutely right. When a young person comes forward and says that they are a child, we assume that they are, and we undertake a rapid assessment of their age, which often agrees with their claim. And then they are treated as a child in care from that moment. So we're able to turn that around quite quickly and make quite quick initial assessments of age. And the vast majority of those are that they are as they claim to be, because there's generally a lack of evidence anyway. And they are then deemed to be children in care and granted all of the protections and services that should give them. You're right that there is then an extended and challenging process around kind of establishing the age of that child or person, which we again don't have ultimate control over. But in terms of the kind of initial safeguarding response, it's done really quickly, and they are usually protected as children in care after that point.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from committee members? Okay, shall I skip to the reading out bit? Right, so we are being asked as the Committee for Children and Young People that we approve the Sufficiency Strategy for Children in Care and Care Leavers 2025 to 28 for publication. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Collar. And all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And then we're moving on to agenda item number 11, which is the Adoption West future options. And Heather, this is you again, isn't it? Because you keep saying that you're called Gail, but you're not.
Yes, so this report describes the options for the delivery of adoption services beyond February 27, which is when the Adoption West contract expires, and it also seeks to agree a delivery option and to delegate the development of future contracting arrangements to the Executive Director for Children Education, returning to the committee for approval of this contract. Adoption West is a company wholly owned by the 6 local authorities, including Bristol. It was established in March 2019 to deliver specified statutory adoption services on the behalf of those local authorities, following the requirement from the DfE that local authorities move to regional adoption models. Those local authority partners recently commissioned an external review of the progress to date, alongside consideration of alternative models to support the best approach to service provision in 2027. And the review found that the best option was to continue developing Adoption West and to build on the progress that's been made to date. Positively, Adoption West has been rated good in 2 Ofsted inspections. It consistently performs well and receives good feedback from those who use it. All 6 local authorities are presenting reports like this for approval to continue with Adoption West, and will then begin to work on refining the operating model. And a full report will return to committee later in 2026, and in the other local authorities as well, with the contracting detail for final approval. We want to ensure continuity of service in this area and minimise the impact of any changes for children, families and staff, and that will be integral to the development process. We've touched a bit on sufficiency of adoptive parents already. This approach, we hope, will help us to continue to develop in that area whilst minimising disruption. And we absolutely appreciate that we need more adoptive parents, and we need them to reflect the identities of our children. I'm hopeful that we are able to do that development work in this kind of formation and with the other local authority areas that we're working with, and avoid kind of further disruption in that area. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members of the committee? Councillor Varney.
Just a quick question. Do we know what stage the other local authorities are at in terms of having this report or a similar report to this approved?
Very similar. I don't know the exact dates of their approvals, but they're all taking them along the same timescales as us. So they should be at a similar point.
Okay, anybody else? Shall I go straight to the reading out then? Okay, fab. So as the Children and Young People's Committee, we are asked to approve in principle to continue with Adoption West as the preferred option for the regional adoption agency beyond 2027. So number 2, authorise the Executive Director of Children and Education in consultation with the Chair of the CYP Committee to take all steps required to work with the key stakeholders and partners to further develop the options for Adoption West as outlined in the report. Number 3, we note the full background information on Appendix A prepared for the 6 local authorities and the options appraisal developed in relation to the recommendation at exempt Appendix E. And number 4, note a further report will be brought back to the committee with options to consider for Adoption West beyond February 2027. And then there's a couple of notes underneath. So there's no contractual obligations at this stage. A further report will outline recommended contractual arrangements. And the Adoption West partners are committed to seek an initial approval for the continuation of Adoption West in Q3 2025-26. It allows 12 months for the development work and the final set of proposals to come back to committee in Q3 in 2026-27 ahead of the expiry of the current arrangements in February 2027. So there's some preparatory work that it will be ongoing and kind of working alongside the extension of this contract. So do I have a seconder for those particular elements? Thank you, Councillor Hornton. And all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Well, we're speeding now. So agenda item number 12 is the extension of the Parent and Child Residential Assessment Framework. It's Heather again, it's not Gail, and this is one of those it's a statutory requirement, but it's an element of work that you wouldn't necessarily knew unless this was your particular area of work. The paper I found interesting because it kind of goes into the core elements of social care, but over to yourself, Heather.
That's right. So the report seeks approval for the Parent and Child Residential Assessment Open Framework to be extended for 3 years until December 28. The framework was initiated in 2018 after receiving Cabinet approval and has been extended once already by 2 years in 2023. So residential assessment centres provide accommodation and support for parents experiencing significant vulnerability and where there are safeguarding concerns for both them and their children. Providers in those assessment centres monitor and holistically assess the parents' capacity to respond to the children's needs and ability to safeguard their welfare. And then within a controlled environment, parents are given tailored advice, guidance, psychological support such as counselling as considered appropriate. Placements are not ever expected to exceed 3 months at a time, and assessments are intended to provide a robust, fair and evidence-based appraisal of parenting skills and capability to enable relevant professionals and, as you said, the courts to make permanency decisions for children. So we have a statutory duty to assess the needs of children and their families, and often that is court-directed when we're making decisions about care planning and permanence, and that's under the Children Act 1989. we're required to assess whether a child can remain with or return to their birth family, determine the most appropriate permanence option, and whilst it's not named as a separate statutory duty, parent and child assessments are often a necessary part of fulfilling our broader statutory duties under Section 17 and Section 20 and Section 31. So some placements are made as a result of court order in the context of care proceedings, or are commissioned as a part of pre-proceedings processes. And in these cases, the decision about whether to place a family for a parent and child assessment, as well as the type of placement and the planned duration, can be made by judges or family courts. So it's a framework that we're using at the moment. It's used by Bristol and also our neighbouring partner local authorities, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset, and Bath and North East Somerset, and they all call off this framework in a local authority partnership agreement. It was created to facilitate long-term partnerships with providers, creating a working environment that we hope can support continuous improvement for high-quality, child-centred assessment services. The average spend against the framework over the last 5 years for Bristol has been £224,321, and the usage is fairly steady, slightly falling. The forecast of likely spend based on the previous 5 years over the remainder of the framework's life is £672,964 for Bristol. And therefore, we don't think we would need any additional funding for this contract extension, as the original funding envelope should remain sufficient. I should say that there's no obligation to spend against this contract, and that the framework, we hope, will allow us to keep the market buoyant and to help our providers to kind of remain sustainable into the future as well.
Thank you very much. Shona?
Yeah, no, thank you. This is useful to read. And these residential assessments centres, they're extremely intense, but often very necessary to get a really thorough idea of how the parents can parent the child and do that in a safe and controlled environment. I had a couple of questions. One was as to if we know why the number of placements we've done in the last few years has dropped down. It seems to have dropped from 16 into the 2022-2023 year down to 4 in 23-24, and then it's stayed quite low.
Oh, thank you, sorry. But courts are requiring them slightly less. I think it's also worth saying these are relatively small numbers. So again, you're likely to see quite a lot of variation in them, and we may see a slight uptick as well.
Thank you. And my second question was about, so obviously these placements, they're for assessment, but they're also for support to help these vulnerable parents learn how to care for their children safely. Do we have the outcomes of how, quote unquote, successful the placements have been in that? And that's maybe not the right phrasing, but do we have any idea of how many of these have gone on to have maybe a positive parenting assessment, and how many have gone on to sadly say, actually, these parents, even with intensive support, won't be able to do it? Do we have a rough split as to how that's gone?
We do. I don't have it to hand. What I would say is that it is, so where the assessment's made in pre-proceedings, we see that the support element is much more significant, and we tend to see much better outcomes if a good outcome is the family remaining together. Whereas when it is kind of in the court arena already, those outcomes tend to be less good. And the split does tend to go that way in Bristol as nationally. And I can provide the exact breakdown. I mean, this contract is monitored on a monthly basis, and so we kind of monitor all of that data really regularly.
So where we're able to get in earlier and parents are willing to engage with this process in an earlier stage, we're able to, there's a higher rate of being able to keep those parents and those children together.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Susan?
I was a bit confused when I first looked at it because I think it's the corporate parent coming out of it. And when I seen the youth adopter program, I was like, oh, more adopting of our children. But having actually read the information and everything else, I'm really excited about it. Really excited about what that step is moving forward, supporting children, young people from those sort of disadvantages, facing those sorts of issues and problems. And my only question really is, have we any idea where our hub will be?
I think we might be on a different item.
Yeah, that's the next paper.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, the youth is the
no.
next paper, yeah.
It's late. It's been a long
It is
day.
late, it is late.
I'd be happy to go.
Yeah, we'll come back to
Well,
that one
we
later.
could hold that question. Hold that question.
I'll hold that question. You just carry on, ignore me.
Okay, are we ready to move? Okay, so I need to do the reading. Right, so we are asked as the Children and Young People Committee to note the previous approval to enter into an open framework or a dynamic purchasing system for 4+2+2+2 years in October 2018, as set out in the report. We are, number 2, authorising the Executive Director of Children in consultation with the Chair of the CYP Committee to extend the Parent and Child Residential Assessment Framework in line with the procurement routes and maximise the maximum budget envelope outlined in the report and the Cabinet report from 2018. Number 3, it authorises the Executive Director of Education to invoke any subsequent extensions or variations specifically designed in the contract or contracts awarded up to the budget envelope outlined in the report and the Cabinet report from 2018. Number 4, note that no changes will be made to any of the original framework documents, including the service specification and the contract with providers. And finally, note that the rate card will be adjusted in accordance with agreed uplift negotiation processes. So, can I just clarify what that means? What is a rate card?
So the framework will have set out at its initiation a rate, and there will be inflationary increases applied to that, and that will have been set out in the initial contract at the beginning, and the rate of inflation will also have been stipulated on the rate card at the beginning. Okay. So it's set. Right. It's quite helpful in terms of managing the spending.
Yeah, I can see that manages the sort of the budget planning. Yeah. But I can also see that could be an advantage financially to the local authority or a disadvantage depending on what happens to inflation over the period of the.
In this instance, it's an advantage, but you're absolutely right.
Okay. Sorry, Okay, so can I have a seconder for the paper, please? Thank you, Shona. And all those in favour, please raise your hands. There we go, unanimous. Okay. And then we're moving on to agenda item number 13, Councillor Collar's favourite paper, Young Futures Programme, the early adopters. Heather, it's again, this is you.
It is, yes. So this paper is to seek approval to accept and spend a grant of up to £800,000 as an early adopter of the cross-government Young Futures Hub programme. So the funding is to A, establish Young Futures Hub, and B, boost the local authority leadership to ensure that there is a strong system to meet the statutory duty to provide youth services across the city. So the initial part of this funding is the sum of £100,000 to deliver the stage 1 part of this process, which is the co-design and planning of the programme. And that was taken as an officer decision in September 2025, and this followed a joint decision made by the Exec Director and the Section 151 and the Strategy and Resources Committee Chair to approve the participation in the Early Adopter Young Future Hubs programme. We're one of 8 local authorities selected to be an early adopter of the programme, and the initial £100,000 was awarded back in September, so that work has been ongoing and has started. And we will soon be able to draw down the remainder. So the programme is a cross-government programme with a lead responsibility sitting in DCMS, and the programme will create a network of Young Futures hubs, building on existing youth provision to increase access to opportunities, including careers development, improve mental health and well-being, and reduce vulnerability of young people to being drawn into crime. The idea is that it brings together support services for young people and works with the existing youth and play providers in the city. The core age will be 10 to 18 and up to 25 for children and young people with SEND, and early adopters will be expected to be ready to deliver a hub by March 26, which necessarily means that we must build on existing provision. We don't have time to build a big new youth centre. So it's looking to really rapidly improve provision based on what we've already got, building on strength. Given that I know you're interested in the location, it's probably worth me saying now that we're not yet able to share that. So DCMS are not allowing us to publicise the work just yet, but we are absolutely able to take decisions and get on with it. So it's probably worth me talking you through a little bit of the factors that are considered in selecting a location. So there has to be space for open access, group support, confidential, one-to-one, and multiple breakout zones, an outside area, sports area, music and arts activities. And there has to be scope for multi-agency co-location and co-delivery. It has to consider staffing levels, opening hours, and multi-use, reach, transport links, permanency and sustainability. And in front of all of those is the local need and the needs assessment of how much provision there is already in a local area and the needs of the children and young people in that area, broadly aligned to deprivation, but not exclusively. So there's been a significant amount of work to kind of develop a needs analysis really and really map provision across the city already and work in those local areas to understand both where we have sufficient strength and an asset to build on and the right level of need that we really want to target resource in that area. I should also say it's a hub and spoke model. So the idea is that whilst we have to choose a location for the hub, it should be operating as a hub and it should be undertaking work both within that asset, but also reaching out across locations and doing detached youth work as well. So whilst we do have to choose a location, the reach should be much broader than that.
Thank you very much. Okay, and we are one of 8, is my understanding. So the 8 local authorities, and we were invited to join in with this. And the not being able to make the announcements, I would imagine, I'm only surmising that it's because it's probably the Department of Culture, Media and Sport want to do that themselves at a central time, I would have thought.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they want to make a central announcement. We were expecting that it might have happened by now. I think it will be quite soon.
So, looking at committee members, any... okay, Councillor Collar, off you go.
Well, I'm just going to carry on where I was talking before. How excited I am about it, and I think for young people across the whole area, Bristol, we'll really be able to take advantage of the activities and the support and I can just picture it in my head of all these organisations coming together and like putting on all this stuff for these kids that have been really disadvantaged, have had some horrific issues that have had a massive impact on them, and to just get that kind of, I just like it.
Catcher? Yeah.
I was lucky to speak to the youth and in National Youth Association when they came in and they did a presentation, and that was really very interesting. But it was very sad as well because I used to work for the youth and play services in Bristol many years ago, and when you saw the budget is now and what the budget was then, and you're like, oh, and that they've got only 3 senior youth workers and there used to be like 30 of us, senior youth workers and play workers. And the other thing I wanted to say, this is very positive, it's in the right direction. And what I was really good to see, I wasn't happy to see it, but it was good to see, well, one of the things that's really important is that they're included in all those programs you have about extrafamilial harm, about low attainment, about not going to school, that kinds of thing. Youth workers and play workers have a really strong point to pick out and to see. As a play worker, I knew my children far better than I do as a secondary school teacher. And that's always still a sadness in me because of the help that I used to give them. So I'm really happy that we're one of the ones that got chosen, because we were the play centre we were at the time. So this is really good. That's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you. Any others? Shona?
Yeah, I know we don't know the location yet. I just hope it's somewhere accessible for as many young people as possible. I know many of us here represent really deprived wards where everyone is really worried about their young people and about their children and about their futures. And then antisocial behaviour is also an issue often because those young people and children don't have anywhere positive to go and their homes are overcrowded and they end up on the streets because that's the only place they've got to hang out. So yeah, anything we can do to tackle that is really important. And talking to experienced youth workers is really sad in that they're talking about how they feel like they've lost a whole generation of children. Like the older teenagers, they're saying, we basically have to throw up our hands. We can't do anything with them. Hope maybe they'll come around in their own time. But if we can get in there with the younger teenagers, that's where there's hope. And that's really sad that that's what this country's experienced in the last 10, 20, however many years. So anything we can do to start turning that around is really good. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to have to read the papers out again. So we, as a committee for children and young people, we are being asked to, 1, note the report and approves, subject to meeting the programme requirements and any associated grant conditions, except up to £800,000 from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport for delivery as an early adopter of the Youth Hubs programme. And number 2, we're authorising the Director of Children and Education in consultation with the Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee to take all the steps required to accept and spend the Stage 2 implementation funding of the £800,000, including procuring and awarding the contracts necessary for implementing the early adopter programme from September 25 to the end of 2026, in line with the budget envelope outlined in the report. And number 3, authorises the Director of Education to invoke any subsequent extensions or variations. We like the word extension in that, don't we? Variations specifically defined in the contracts being awarded up to the budget envelope outlined in the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Collar, thank you very much. Favourite paper. Okay, and all those committee members in favour of this, please raise your hands. Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much. And then that takes us on to our final agenda item, which is number 14, which is the Period 5 Finance report. Period 5 is to the end... What? Sorry? It's to the end of August, isn't it? Yes, is that right? So it's April, May, June, July. Yeah, so this is the report as of how things looked with our finances as of the end of August. And it's got your name on it, Hannah. Yes. So over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, sorry. And I'm supported here by Ben, who is our new finance business partner and has been brilliant in terms of supporting us here. So this is information that has gone to the Strategy and Resources Committee. As you say, it's a little bit out of date. What we're trying to do is keep up with the information that's delivered through the Strategy and Resources Committee, which is why there's a lag. What the report says is that we are presenting, frustratingly, a 8.8 million overspend against our budget, or we were at the point of August. and it sets out the reasons why we were seeing that. And so just to say a little bit more, and we're happy to take any questions about that. As you know, we are, over many years, we have seen really significant pressures in children's and young people's services, particularly in children's services, around placements. And it's worth saying that in other core cities, in every case, we are seeing significant overspends against pressures, particularly arising from sort of inflationary pressures around children's social care. Now, that isn't necessarily what's being presented here, because we have had a previous presentation from social workers against the Families First work, where we can demonstrate we have got significant savings against our placements budget due to the work that we've been doing. It's not all perfect. There's definitely more we can do to get upstream of children with high needs. But there has been some significant progress, particularly bringing children back into Bristol. So what you can see here, and it's hard work, and it's ongoing, and it's challenging, and we know that the social environment that we're operating in is consistently challenging. So it's not straightforward. But what you can see here is an 8.8 million overspend, of which the biggest parts are set out in the paper. The first biggest part, interestingly, relates back to Councillor Collar's point earlier about the costs of unaccompanied asylum seeker children who come in as care leavers and then come in as children in care and then leave as care leavers, and that's because the government grant that we get for care leavers is less than the grant that we get for children in care. So whilst we're supported up until they're 18, then the grant drops off, but they're still with us because they're care leavers, as you say. The duties are the same. We need to provide housing in particular, and until they are processed, that's on us. And rightly, and obviously many of these young people are very traumatised, they're very vulnerable, and it's, it's right that we meet those needs. So there is a pressure there. I've been in touch with the other core cities, particularly Manchester and Liverpool, who have a very significant pressure as well. And as we said earlier on, we can write to the Home Office. We will write to the Home Office. I don't expect a sort of immediate here's your 2.6 million, to be honest, but that's where the pressure is coming from. So that's the single biggest pressure. The second pressure is we've already talked about as well, which is the point Councillor Varney raised around the delay to internal children's homes. So you can see that that's the slippage that I was referring to. There, as I say, we're trying to catch that up as quickly as we can. Also considering how we can maximise the use of those children's homes, obviously considering the care plans of those children first, so that we can make the right financial decisions as well as care decisions for children. So we've got a piece of work looking at the maximised use of our children's homes. You'll forgive, I'm talking to a finance paper, so you'll forgive my language about that. We obviously put the care plans first. Third area is around disabled. It's really the disabled children's home. So it's really a debate with our health colleagues about cost of provision for children in the disabled children's home, and just to say we are in sort of fairly challenging conversations with health providers about recovering that amount. And then the other areas there is we have seen a bit of a rise in terms of children requiring external placements against what we planned in our growth position. So, I mean, we can talk more about the growth that we've built into the year, which, as you know, in previous years was about 24%. We planned a very low level of growth in this year, and we have seen slightly above that. And it's a very live debate for us at the moment as we're looking at setting our budgets for next year. And then we've got a pressure around no recourse to public funds. So this is people who are in the city and are destitute with children and are presenting for support, but probably don't have leave to remain, and therefore it's a very sort of difficult assessment. There are legal requirements for us to provide, and there are legal requirements that we don't have to, and so the team are working through how we can draw the line in a legal way for people who should return to their country and do not have legal right to remain. And then there's a point about additional pressures on legal costs as a result of the cases that we have coming through the service. So that's on the children's social care side, and then, I mean, we've got some smaller pressures on the education, inclusion and skills side. It's good. I think it's worth noting, given the discussions that we've had around this table, is that we have got a positive position on home to school travel, which again, we really recognise how hard one that works. That has been really sensitive, careful conversations with parents through the Parent Carer Forum to manage some changes and reductions in home to school, or the different ways in which we provide travel, not transport. And then lastly, the paper does talk to Dedicated Schools Grant, which largely slight sort of positive movement in this report, and as we know does go up and down. But we also know that we've got a number of children sitting waiting for assessments, so we can expect DSG to go further in the wrong direction. And we know that we're in a safety valve agreement, which we're off track on, and we've talked already about SEND reforms. But you can see the report there. We have got a report coming to this committee in January, which spells out much more our progress against the SEND strategy, financially and educationally. And so we can talk more about that there. So happy, Ben and I, I'm sure, we're happy to take any further questions on the paper. Thank you.
Okay, committee members, over to yourselves. Susan.
I just got a quick question. I'm reading down through all the finances and everything, and I've looked at the no recourse to public funds. So obviously this is young people who haven't been put through the procedures with the Home Office to give them leave to remain or whatever. So that recourse to public funds is where we are picking up the budget for supporting those children while they're children. Do we get that money back?
So did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, in my understanding is that some of that will be for children who are here with their families, but the families maybe have no recourse to public funds. But as a local authority, we still have a duty towards those children, so we may end up housing the whole family because there's children there. That's the right thing to do.
So I in my head it was just like these were for like unaccompanied children. So the family issue is that kind of gives me an idea of where that coming from. And then there was the other one about pensions. Now that puzzled me because children don't have pensions. So I'm assuming that it is along to go with the staff who are looking after those children in terms of across the board. Teachers,
yeah. Sorry.
The value of the teacher pension scheme has gone up markedly over the last few years, outstripping our budget. So we've...
is that because we have more teachers or because the pension
I think it's the
fund
individual
has gone up?
value. I think it's like a pension per person issue rather than an increasing number of pensions.
And that's teachers that are in state schools as opposed to in academies, because there's different funding, isn't it?
Well, academies are state schools, so my understanding is, well, certainly if you work in an academy, your terms and conditions they're nationally set, like they are if you worked in a local authority maintained school. I don't know about the independent kind of, and by independent I mean QEH and your fee paying. I don't know what the situation is for teachers there and whether they can enter into it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions or? Okay, so we are. There's no vote on this. I think we're being asked to note. Is that correct? So we're being asked to note this, and I got some nods. Thank you very much. And so that brings us to the end of the agenda. Thank you very much to everybody, and have a great break over the end of the year. And our next committee meeting is in January. Oh, go ahead.
To ask you, it was to do with the funds of building new support for new schools, and I did a visit at Claremont House just recently, and they gave me some of the rundowns of what they're having trouble with, and I was just wondering, I'm not going to go into detail on at the meeting. I'm just going to ask you if there would be a case where we could meet up at some point to talk about what's happening with Claremont School, basically.
Shall we? Yes, I mean, I don't know, I'm just looking to see if the rest of the committee are interested in the capital programme. We might
Capital programme, that's the word.
Yeah, I mean, we might, and with Claremont specifically as in mind, but also look at some of the developments over the, maybe we do something online as a CYP committee and look at that specifically. Yeah?
Okay. Just to reassure you that we are in active discussions, and it is part of our current capital programme at the moment, but it has taken a very long time. So.
And they are suffering with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks.